Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person who posts her family's business online. I've spent most of my adult life being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who doesn't make scenes, doesn't start drama, doesn't air the family laundry. But here's the thing about being quiet for too long. The people around you start to mistake your silence for permission. And my sister Diane, she mistook my entire body for permission. She decided at some point that my womb was a family resource, a convenience, something she was entitled to access because we shared the same parents and the same last name. And when I told her no, when I said, actually, my body belongs to me, she tried to burn my life down. What she didn't know, what she never even considered, was that I had been quietly holding a folder with her name on it. A folder that, the moment I opened it at that dinner table, changed absolutely everything. I still think about the look on her husband's face when he read the first page. I think about it a lot. Stay with me. Because this story, I need you to hear all of it. Let me tell you who I was before all of this. I grew up in a pretty normal household in Ohio. Middle-class family. My dad, Richard, worked in logistics. My mom, Carol, was a school administrator. And there were three of us kids, my older brother Tom, me in the middle, and Diane, the youngest. Now, I want to be fair here. I don't want to sit here and tell you my childhood was some kind of horror movie. It wasn't. We had birthday cakes and family road trips and Christmases with too many decorations. It was on the surface, a regular family. But if you grew up as the middle child in a family where someone else was the favorite, you already know what I'm about to say. You know the specific weight of it. The way it doesn't show up as anything dramatic most of the time. It's not like someone sits you down and says, you are loved less. It's quieter than that. It's in the way your achievements are acknowledged with a nod, while your sisters are celebrated with dinner out. It's in the way you tell your mom you got a promotion, and she says, oh, that's nice. Did you hear Diane is redecorating her whole house? It's 1,000 small moments that stack up over 15, 20, 30 years. Diane was the baby. She was bubbly and social, and she had this gift for making adults adore her. She could charm anyone, teachers, neighbors, my parents' friends. And my parents, especially my mom, they just lit up around her. She could do no wrong. I was the steady one. I got good grades. I worked hard. I didn't cause problems. And that, apparently, is the worst possible thing you can be in a family that rewards sparkle, because steady gets taken for granted every single time. By the time I was in college, I had accepted it. I didn't waste energy being bitter about it. I just built my own life. I got my degree in marketing. I met my husband, Daniel, at 27. He's a structural engineer, quiet, funny, the kind of man who shows up when he says he will every single time. We got married in a small ceremony. We bought a house in North Carolina. We got a dog named Chester. We built something real and good and ours. I didn't need my family's validation to know my life was worth something. But I should have paid more attention to the signs. Because they were there. They were always there. Diane married a man named Greg when she was 29. Greg is fine. That's honestly the most accurate word for him. He's an accountant. He's pleasant. He does what Diane asks without much pushback, which is probably why she married him. Greg is the human equivalent of a yes man dressed in khakis. For the first couple of years, everyone assumed they'd have kids quickly. Diane had always talked about wanting a big family. 4 kids, she used to say. She wanted a big, loud, full house. But a few years into the marriage, there were no kids, and then a few more years passed. And I started noticing that every time the topic came up at family gatherings, Diane would change the subject or leave the room. My mom told me quietly, one afternoon on the phone, that Diane was having some issues in that department. She said it in that hushed, careful voice she reserved for serious things. I felt genuinely sad for Diane. I did. Infertility is painful. It's a real loss, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I called Diane that week. I told her I was sorry. I told her I was here if she needed to talk. She thanked me, and for a few months, things between us were actually almost warm. I should have known warmth from Diane always had a transaction waiting on the other side of it. The first time she brought up surrogacy, I thought she was just venting. We were at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. Daniel and I had driven up, and Diane and Greg were there too. After dinner, while the men watched football and my mom fussed with the dishes, Diane and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. She said casually, almost offhandedly, "You know I've been looking into surrogacy." I said I'd heard something like that. She said, "It's so expensive, Maya. You have no idea. The agency fees alone are insane." I agreed that it sounded incredibly expensive. And then she looked at me sideways and said, family surrogacy is so much simpler and more meaningful, I think, when it's someone who really loves you. I didn't respond to that directly. I steered the conversation somewhere else and told myself I had read too much into it. I hadn't. 3 months later, she called me on a Tuesday night. I was in the middle of making dinner. Daniel was at the kitchen table with his laptop. It was a perfectly ordinary evening. Diane said she needed to talk to me about something important. I turned the stove down and moved to the living room. She started slowly. She talked about how much she and Greg wanted a family. She talked about how the fertility treatments weren't working, how the doctors had told her that carrying a pregnancy herself was not going to happen. She talked about how heartbroken she was. And I listened. I genuinely listened. And then she said, "I want you to be our surrogate, Maya." I didn't say anything for a moment. She kept going. She said it would be a gestational surrogacy. She and Greg would use donor eggs since her own eggs weren't viable either. I would just be carrying the baby. She said it would be such a gift. She said there was no one she trusted more. She said family was the most important thing. And then, and this is the part that told me everything I needed to know about what this conversation really was. She mentioned the cost. She said, "And obviously, because you're family, we wouldn't be doing contracts or agency fees. It would just be between us." There it was. She didn't want a surrogate. She wanted a free surrogate, one she could control, one who wouldn't have legal protections, one who wouldn't ask questions or set limits. I told her I needed time to think about it. She said, "Of course, take all the time you need." And she sounded so warm, so reasonable, so grateful. I stayed up until midnight that night, talking to Daniel. He was calm about it, the way he always is. He didn't get angry. He just asked me a question, "What do you actually want, Maya?" And I realized I already knew the answer. I just hadn't let myself say it yet. I did not want to do this. Not because I didn't love Diane. Not because I didn't feel for her situation. But because I had a body that belonged to me, and pregnancy is not a small thing. It is not a favor like driving someone to the airport. It is 9 months of your life, your health, your body, your risk. It is a medical process with real physical consequences. And doing it without contracts, without protections, without any formal agreement, that was a recipe for disaster, even if the person asking was someone I fully trusted. Which, if I'm being honest, Diane was not. I called her back 4 days later. I told her I was honored she trusted me, and I was deeply sorry for what she was going through. And then I said no. I said I wasn't comfortable with the surrogacy, and especially not without any legal structure around it. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, in a completely flat voice, "I see. That was it." She hung up, and I thought, okay, she's hurt. She'll be upset for a while. We'll work through it. I had no idea what was about to start. It started with my mother. About a week after my call with Diane, my mom called me and said, out of nowhere, or so I thought, "Maya, I've been thinking about Diane and what she's going through. She's really struggling." I said I knew, and I felt for her. My mom said, "She told me about the conversation you two had. Something shifted in my chest." I asked what Diane had said. My mother said, "She said you refused to help her, that you said your own comfort was more important than her having a family. I felt that the way you feel a slap you didn't see coming." I explained what actually happened. I explained about the lack of contracts, the legal exposure, the physical reality of what she was asking. My mom listened, and when I finished, she said, "I just think, Maya, that when your sister is suffering, you could find it in your heart to be more giving, and That sentence right there told me that the story Diane had told was already settled in my mother's mind as the truth. Over the next weeks, it spread through the family like something in the water. My aunt called me and said she hoped I would reconsider for Diane's sake. A cousin sent me a long text about the importance of sacrifice in families. My dad, who historically stayed out of conflict, actually said to me on the phone, "Your mother and I raised you to be generous, Maya. I want you to understand what Diane had done. She had carefully, methodically built a case against me. Not a case that said Maya has valid concerns about surrogacy. A case that said Maya is cold and selfish and refused to help her suffering sister out of selfishness. She had framed my refusal not as a personal boundary, but as a moral failure. And my family, because Diane was the golden child, because she had spent 30 years perfecting the art of being believed, ate it up whole. If you've ever had a sibling try to do something like this to you, let me know in the comments. Because the loneliness of being smeared by someone your own family trusts more than you is unlike anything else I've ever felt. It didn't stop at family. Diane got bolder. She started telling people in our social circle, friends of the family, people from our hometown, that I had refused to help her in her darkest moment. She framed it as abandonment. She said I had always been a little cold and only cared about myself. Mutual friends from high school started acting differently around me. Someone I'd known for 15 years sent me a message that said, "I heard about what happened with Diane. I'm surprised at you." She even called Daniel's mother once. His mother called him, confused, relaying something Diane had told her. I don't even know what the exact story was. But Daniel came home from that phone call with his jaw tight and his eyes hard, which is as close to fury as Daniel ever gets. I started losing sleep. I started dreading my phone. I started mentally rehearsing conversations I hadn't even had yet, pre-debating every accusation she might make next. The worst part wasn't the things she was saying. The worst part was the way my parents kept calling and gently, lovingly, persistently suggesting that I should just think about it again. My mom said in one conversation, "Diane told me she doesn't even care about the money anymore. She just wants to know if her sister loves her." And I sat there, holding the phone, thinking, that's such a perfect thing to say. That's exactly what someone says when they want to make a boundary feel like a betrayal. Daniel was steady through all of it. He kept telling me, "You don't owe anyone your body, Maya. Not even family." But I could see it wearing on him, too. He'd come home from work, and I'd be on the phone with my mother again, and I could see the tiredness in his eyes, not toward me, but toward all of it. One night, maybe 2 months into all of this, I asked him if he regretted marrying into my family. He said, "I married you, not your family." And then he paused and he said, "But there's something I need to tell you. And I've been waiting for the right moment, but I think the right moment is now." I felt my stomach go cold. He told me calmly. He told me the way you deliver something that has been sitting heavy in you for too long. About 3 weeks earlier, during the early part of Diane's campaign, when things were still in their opening stages, Diane had reached out to Daniel directly, privately. She'd sent him a message saying she needed to talk to him without Maya in the middle of it. He'd agreed to a phone call, thinking it was about finding some kind of resolution, some middle ground. He said the call started normally enough. Diane talking about her pain, about how much she wanted a family, about how hard things were with Greg. Daniel said he was sympathetic. He let her talk. And then she shifted. She started talking about how Greg was struggling with all of it too. She said the fertility issues had put distance between them. She said Greg was emotionally unavailable and she felt completely alone. And then she said, "Daniel, you know that technically, if the biology worked naturally, it would solve everything. No contracts, no procedures, no hospitals." Daniel said he didn't respond immediately because he genuinely needed a second to process what he was hearing. She said, "I'm not asking you to make any commitments. I'm just saying that if we spent some time together and something happened, it would be the most natural thing in the world. And Maya never has to know. Daniel said he felt sick. He told her very clearly that what she was suggesting was something he would never, under any circumstances, consider. He told her it was a betrayal of his wife and of Greg. He told her the conversation was over. She went quiet and then said, "Please don't tell Maya. She'll make it into something bigger than it is." He had been holding that for 3 weeks because he was trying to figure out how to tell me in a way that wouldn't shatter me. I sat with that for a long time after he told me. My sister had not just tried to pressure me into carrying her baby. When I said no, she had gone to my husband and propositioned him. She had tried to get pregnant by sleeping with my husband in secret, and she was out there right now telling everyone in our family that I was the cold one. Something in me went very, very quiet. I told Daniel I needed a couple of days to think, and in those 2 days, I did something that would change everything. My parents' house has a home office. My dad has always kept meticulous records, tax documents, insurance files, family paperwork, going back decades. He's that kind of organized. A few years earlier, when my parents were having some issues with their health insurance provider, they had asked me, because I'm good with paperwork and administrative things, to go through some of their old medical files and pull some documentation they needed. I had done that, and in the process, I had seen things I hadn't gone looking for, including something about Diane. I hadn't thought about it much at the time. It had seemed private and irrelevant to me, and I'd mentally filed it under not my business and moved on. But now I pulled up the copies I had made, because I'm meticulous too, another thing Diane never credited me for, and I read through everything carefully. Here is what the documents showed. When Diane was 24, she had gotten pregnant. Not with Greg, they didn't meet until she was 27, with someone else. A man she had dated briefly who, from what I gathered between the lines of the paperwork, had not been in the picture when the pregnancy was discovered. She had terminated the pregnancy. That is absolutely her right, and I am not here to judge that decision. But the termination had been performed at a clinic that, shortly after, had been flagged for a series of procedural violations. The complications Diane experienced, complications she had never disclosed to our family, complications that had been quietly attributed to a medical condition, were the result of botched follow-up care. The kind of damage that the documents made clear had directly impacted her ability to carry a pregnancy. Here's the second thing. Over the years, through pieces of family conversations I had half heard and half forgotten, I had heard vague references to that thing that happened when Maya was in college, references to some kind of health scare Diane had, always followed quickly by subject changes whenever I was nearby. What I understood now, reading these documents, was what that thing actually was. And more importantly, I now understood why it had been kept from me specifically. Because apparently, at the time, Diane had told my parents a version of the story in which she blamed me. She had told them, I pieced this together from what I found and later confirmed that she had been in a crisis, partly because of stress I had caused her during some conflict we'd had in college. A conflict about a guy we'd both known. A conflict that, in reality, I barely remembered because it had been so minor. But Diane had constructed a narrative in which my actions that year had contributed to her downward spiral. My parents had believed her. Of course they had. And so, all these years, somewhere in the back of my mother's mind, was this half-conscious idea that Maya had once hurt Diane, which made it so much easier to believe that Maya was hurting Diane again now. I sat with all of this for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my parents. I told them I wanted to have dinner, all of us, the family, including Diane and Greg. My mom sounded delighted. She said she hoped it meant I was coming around. I said I thought it was time we all got on the same page. I spent 3 days organizing the folder. Documents, dates, timelines. Daniel helped me structure it. He's an engineer. He's good at building things clearly. By the time we were done, it was airtight. I want to be clear about something. I did not go into that dinner wanting to destroy my sister. I went in wanting the truth to exist in the same room as my family, many of whom had spent months operating on a lie. What happened after that was Diane's own doing. It was a Saturday. My parents had made a real event of it. My mom had cooked, there were nice dishes out. My dad had opened a good bottle of wine. Tom was there with his wife. Diane and Greg arrived a few minutes after us. Diane hugged my parents, said something warm about the house smelling wonderful. She was in her element, performing warmth, performing normalcy, the golden girl holding court. She gave me a hug too, which I accepted. Her hug was careful. She didn't quite meet my eyes. We sat down, we got through soup. My mother kept making careful, optimistic conversation. I could tell she was hoping this dinner would land us in some soft resolution. Maya apologizes, Diane forgives, family heals, everyone gets dessert. Midway through the main course, Diane said, and she said it gently, deliberately, in front of everyone, I've had some time to think. And Maya, I want you to know I forgive you for not being there for me. I know it must be hard to put someone else first when you're not used to it. The table got a little quiet. My mom gave a small, sad smile. My dad nodded like this was profound. Greg looked at his plate, and I looked at Diane. I looked at her for a long moment, then I said, I appreciate that, I do. But I think before we move into forgiveness, we should all actually be looking at the same picture. Because right now, I don't think everyone in this room knows the full story. Diane's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker behind the eyes. I reached into my bag. I set the folder on the table. I started with Daniel. I said, I want to tell everyone something that happened recently. About 6 weeks ago, Diane called my husband privately. She asked him to meet with her without my knowledge. During that call, she suggested that he and she have a sexual relationship in secret, in her words, so that something could happen naturally and I would never have to know. The table went absolutely silent. I didn't look at Diane, I looked at Greg. Greg had gone very, very still. I said Daniel declined and ended the call. He told me shortly after. My mother said quietly, Maya. I said, I'm not done. I opened the folder. I said, I also want to talk about why Diane can't have children. Because the story that has been in this family, the vague, quiet story about a health scare, about a medical condition, is not the full story. Diane said, sharply, don't. I said, I found documents in Dad's files a couple of years ago when I was helping them with the insurance company. I didn't say anything at the time because it wasn't my business. But over the past few months, Diane has made a point of telling our entire family that I am cold, that I am selfish, that I refuse to help her in her darkest moment. She has told people we've known for 20 years that I don't love her. She called Daniel's mother. She has spent months destroying my reputation in this family. I slid the first set of documents to the center of the table, not to Diane. To my father, who was the meticulous record keeper who kept these files in the first place. My dad looked down at them. I watched his face change. I said, Diane experienced a medical complication when she was 24, a complication related to a procedure she had and has never disclosed to this family. That complication is the documented cause of her current fertility issues. That is not a tragedy that simply happened to her. It is the result of a situation she was in and a procedure she chose not to tell anyone about. I wasn't saying she'd done something wrong. I was saying the story she'd told, that her infertility was some innocent, unexplainable medical condition, some cruel cosmic unfairness, was not the whole truth. Diane said very quietly, You had no right to access those records. I said, Dad asked me to go through those files. You've known I helped with that. You've known for 2 years I might have seen things I wasn't meant to see. And you chose to start a war with me anyway. My mother was looking between us like she was watching something break that couldn't be put back together. But here's the part that mattered most. I turned to my dad and said, There's one more thing. And Dad, this one involves you and Mom directly. I found the section I had marked. When this happened, when Diane was 24, she told you and Mom that I was partly to blame, that something I had done, a conflict we'd had at college, had contributed to her crisis. My dad went very still. I said that conflict was real. We had an argument about a mutual friend. It lasted about 2 weeks, and then it was over. I have no memory of it being significant. Diane framed it to you as some kind of sustained cruelty on my part. And I think that story has been sitting in the back of this family's mind for a decade, making it easier to believe that I would hurt her again now. My mom put her hand over her mouth. My dad said slowly, Diane, did you say that to us? Diane said, things were complicated back then. I was in a bad place. Maya and I have always had a difficult dynamic. I said, I gave you an out, Diane. I said no to the surrogacy, and I offered to support you in finding other options. I never attacked you. I never told a single person in this family anything negative about you. You are the one who made phone calls. You are the one who told cousins and aunts and Daniel's mother things that weren't true. You are the one who called my husband and asked him to cheat on me. Greg stood up, not dramatically, not with a shout. He just stood up, slowly, like a man whose body had made a decision before his mind fully caught up. He looked at Diane. He said, you called Daniel? Diane said, Greg, I need you to understand the context. Greg said, did you ask him to sleep with you? The silence in that room was unlike anything I've ever sat inside. Diane said, I was desperate. I didn't know what I was doing. Greg picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He said quietly, I need to leave. He looked at my parents. He thanked them for dinner. He shook my dad's hand. He nodded at me with something in his face that I think was a kind of grief and a kind of acknowledgement, and he walked out. Diane went after him. She was saying his name as she went through the door, and then the door closed, and for a long moment no one at that table said anything. My brother Tom said softly, well, my mom was crying quietly. Not the performative crying she sometimes did during family disagreements, real crying, the kind that means something has shifted that she can't unshift. My dad set the documents back on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure what to do with your hands. I said, I didn't come here to blow everything up. I came here because for months I have been the villain in a story I didn't write, and I needed you to know the truth. My dad looked at me for a long time, and then he said, and this is the thing I will hold on to for the rest of my life. He said, Maya, I owe you an apology. He didn't elaborate. He didn't give a speech. He just said those 4 words, and I think he meant all the years of them, not just the last few months. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. She said, we should have listened to you. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say much. Greg and Diane separated 6 days after that dinner. I know this because Greg reached out to Daniel, not to me, to Daniel, and said he appreciated Daniel's integrity in how he'd handled Diane's call. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time, but hadn't been willing to face it. He said the dinner had been the moment he stopped being able to not face it. I don't know the full story of what happened between them after that. It's not mine to know, but as of the last I heard, they had filed for divorce. Diane did not call me for weeks. When she finally did, it was a voicemail. She didn't apologize exactly. She said she was going through a lot, and she hoped we could find a way forward eventually. That was it. No acknowledgement of what she'd said to our family about me. No acknowledgement of the call to Daniel. No acknowledgement of any of it. I listened to that voicemail twice, and I didn't call her back. That might make me the cold one, like she always said. Maybe. But I think there is a difference between cold and clear. And I am very clear now about what I will and won't accept in the relationships in my life. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not perfect. I don't think it will ever be the easy, uncomplicated thing I always secretly wished it could be. But there is an honesty in it now that wasn't there before. My dad and I have had 2 conversations recently that have gone deeper than anything I remember us talking about in my childhood. My mom has been quieter. She's processing, I think. But she calls me twice a week now instead of once a month, and she actually asks about me, not about Diane, about me. Tom told me a few weeks after the dinner that he had always suspected our parents favored Diane, but had never been able to say it out loud. He said he felt relieved that it was finally real, finally in the room, finally a thing that existed instead of a thing everyone pretended not to see. Daniel and I are good, better than good. There is something about going through something like this together, being attacked from the outside, holding together when it would have been easier to splinter. That has made us something I don't quite have words for. Solid, like load-bearing walls, like the kind of structure that proves itself in a storm. We still have Chester. He is currently asleep on my feet as I type this, and he has no idea any of this happened, and I find that deeply comforting. Here is what I have been thinking about since all of this happened. I think there is a version of me who never said anything, who let Diane's story stand, who let myself be the cold, selfish sister in everyone's memory, who kept being quiet because being quiet is what I'd always done, and because disrupting the family peace felt scarier than accepting the version of myself she'd built. I was close to being that version. I sat on that folder for months. But here's what I kept coming back to. The truth doesn't stop being true just because nobody says it out loud. It sits there in folders, in files, in the backs of people's minds. It waits. And when someone spends months telling anyone who will listen that you are a person you are not, when they take your refusal to give your body away and turn it into proof of your character, at some point you have to decide if the truth is worth the cost of saying it. For me, it was. Not because I wanted to destroy Diane. I want to be honest about that. I didn't go into that dinner hoping Greg would walk out. I went in because I had been tried and convicted in a court my family was running without me, and I needed to be there to present my own evidence. What happened after was between Diane and the choices she'd made long before that night. I will also say this. No one is entitled to your body, not your sister, not your parents, not anyone who loves you, not anyone who is suffering. Suffering is real, and love is real, and family is real, but none of those things override your right to make decisions about your own physical self. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say no and not explain it further. You are allowed to say no and still be a good person. Do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much they claim to love you, make you believe that your boundary is a betrayal. If you've ever been made to feel that way by someone in your family, I want you to know I CC you. I understand that specific exhaustion. And I hope somewhere in this story, you found something that felt a little like relief. If this story resonated with you, I'd really love to know in the comments, especially if you've ever dealt with the golden child dynamic, or if someone in your family has ever made a demand that crossed a line you thought they'd never cross. Because I think a lot of us have been there quietly, not sure if what we're experiencing is real or if we're the ones making it up. You're not making it up, and you're not alone. Thank you for being here and for staying all the way to the end. This one was hard to tell, but I'm glad it's finally told. Take care of yourselves. I mean that.